Hello. So I'm going to be honest. I really struggled to write this speech, and I procrastinated for a long time, but not out of laziness like usual, but out of fear, because I was judging myself for what I wanted to talk about. But as the deadline kept getting closer and closer, I was procrastinating more. So finally, I set up a meeting with my English teacher to hold myself accountable. And yet, I still couldn't write anything that I was proud of. So I started to cry right before the meeting, but I made myself go anyways because I knew that I had to do this. And sure enough, the first thing that my teacher asked me when I sat down is, "So what is it about?" And I panicked because I couldn't answer. Because I knew that I wanted to write something about purpose, but personally, I always fluctuate between two extremes. Sometimes I feel like life has no purpose and it's all just about living in the present moment and just being. And then the other part of me thinks that there has to be more to life than this, right? Because as much as I consider myself someone who is content, I don't see myself as fulfilled. Anyway, so when my teacher asked me what impact I wanted to have, that's when it clicked. Because I knew that I wanted to talk about happiness, But every single time I was asked about it, I felt my throat close up. I felt so afraid, and for no real reason. But I think it's because, as Sean Anker noted in an article for the Harvard Business Review, we as Americans have a tendency to see happy people as delusional or shallow or anti-intellectual. And not only that, I consider myself someone who's kind of addicted to sadness, and I kind of made it a competition, Because if someone slept 6 hours, then I only slept 3. And it was so easy for me to keep doing this, for me to keep feeling like I needed my pain to be validated, so I was looking for opportunities to validate it. And it was just so easy because, as Tessia Blake wrote, it's easy to be addicted to sadness, because it asks nothing of you. It requires very little of you except for that you feel sorry for yourself. And to add to that, it's also really easy to feel sad in this consumerist society. And I'm not just saying, consumerist society to sound fancy, right? I'm saying that because Alan Durning wrote in an article for The Washington in 1993 that psychological evidence shows that the relationship between personal happiness and consumption is weak. And worse, two primary sources of human fulfillment, social time and leisure, have withered. And thus, many in the consumer society have a sense that their world of plenty is somehow hollow. And that was written 30 years ago. So now, throw in technology and social media into the mix, and as Sherry Turkle describes, that's making us less connected because we're spending less real time alone. And that means that our human connection there's less of it, right? But yet, it's something that we all kind of crave. It's something that we look forward to. It's kind of like a sunset or a sunrise. It's so fleeting, but when it's there, it's so beautiful. That is why I'm so grateful that my teacher took the time to have that long discussion with me and to share ideas. And she even brought in another teacher because it was during that moment when I leaned back in my chair that I realized that this is exactly the kind of kindness, the kind of moment of connection that I wanted to honor. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced something like this before, A coworker who takes on an extra shift for you, a friend who offers to drive you to the airport, even just the compliment of a stranger. And all those examples, I chose them because they show that you don't need to be great. You don't need to be the next Gandhi in order for you to be a miracle in someone's day. Let me tell you a story. A while ago, I had a performance coming up, and I was absolutely terrified. It was my first ever performance, and I didn't feel good enough, and this was made even worse because at the rehearsal, I totally bombed it. And I left that rehearsal feeling so bad. I felt like this small little mouse curled up on the floor, looking up at all these giants I perceived to be so much greater than me. And it was a terrible feeling. But it's also a common part of the human experience because I'm sure that most of us, if not all of us, have failed before, at least once. And it's terrible, but it's real. And yeah, in hindsight, it wasn't that important, right? But I gave it a lot of importance, and I didn't even notice how the stress was permeating into my everyday. all the sunny days were cloudy, you know? So I was trying to escape a lot. So I was going to a coffee shop to draw. And one day I was there, and this man approached me. And he was smiling with approval at my drawing. And we got to talking. And basically, I started to hear all about his life, about growing up during World War II, about living through the Vietnam War and the Cold War, and about trying to make it as a traveling artist during the 70s and 80s. And I was feeling a real connection with this guy. I was like, man, this is exactly the kind of artist I aspire to be. And yet, when he pulled out a card and asked for my name, I actually got kind of nervous, because I was like, oh man, is this connection fake? Like, am I going to get scammed? Am I in trouble? You know? But then he told me that every day he tries to write the name of someone that he met that day to remind himself of the good in the world. And just like that, with the tip of his hat, he was out the door, and he was a stranger to me again. But I still have his card that has my name on it that says, "For truly we are all angels, temporarily hiding as humans." And I don't feel like an angel, but in that moment, when I was so stressed and scared, I had this stranger's confidence in me. And all of a sudden, that gave me the kind of buoyancy I needed, the kind of calmness that I was looking for. And I know that might be sounding kind of wishy-washy or like, oh, once-in-a-lifetime experience, but I promise you it is possible to see that good in the everyday. One of my favorite Nobel Prize-winning poets, Wisława Szymborska, wrote a poem called The Miracle Fair. And she wrote this during her time in Poland, and she was there when it was occupied by both the Nazis and the Soviets. And despite that, she was still able to write this poem. And I'll share with you my 3 favorite lines. One miracle out of many, a small airy cloud, and yet it can block out a large and heavy moon. And I love those 3 lines because they immediately subvert the reader's expectations of what strength is. Because something as light as a cloud is like a veil, yet it has the strength to block out something that can reflect the sun's rays. I mean, that's crazy. And to me, that's the strength behind human connection. And that's what can provide us the happiness that we're all kind of looking for. You know? And I just absolutely love that poem because I think that we really can be the miracle in the everyday. But when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about relentless positivity. I'm not talking about those corporate slogans that they like to just throw at us all the time, like, oh, you're so strong no matter what, or you're beautiful, you know, the kind of thing you read at like a Walgreens or something. I'm not talking about that because that isn't real. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever I read something like that, I don't feel anything. I don't feel comforted because I know that it's fake, it's impersonal, it's just marketing. No, when I'm talking about connection and purpose and life and happiness and all that, I'm talking about what's real. And I know that life is painful and that sometimes it feels like we're drowning in an ocean and you're just trying to get away from the waves, but it feels like this set is just never ending. And I'm not denying that. But I will share this. When a friend of mine close to my age passed away recently, I didn't find solace crying alone in the bathroom stall with the smell of bleach heavy in the air and the fluorescent lights flickering. I found peace within the community, within my community, within their warm arms and their tears and their smiles and their laughter and their stories, because that's when I knew that I wasn't alone. And when my best friend asked me if we could talk about it, of course I said yes, because even though it was difficult, it was so real. And I genuinely believe that it was that connection that got us through this person's passing, you know? I think that most of us humans are just trying our best to be enough, to be good, you know? And even though many of you out there right now are strangers to me, I trust you, because you are human, like I am human, and being human is just trying to be okay. Okay with the past, the present, the future, okay with the way things are. But I also think that it's okay to try to be more than okay or to be more than okay, because I don't think that we need to buy into this happiness lie that says that happiness is delusional or just it's an inevitable just to suffer and we should really wallow in that, or that it's weak to be happy or it's too idealistic to look for it. Because I genuinely believe that if we start to value real human connection more, we can find that happiness that we seek. I'll end with this. In a book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, the author implies that the more we trust people, the more trustworthy we as people prove ourselves to be. So, I trust you to not only see the good in the everyday, but to be the miracle in someone else's. Thank you.